You know what it is, guys? I don't want to say that I figured it out. However, let's be real for a second. I think the biggest problem with people struggling with things like relationships or new opportunities or, career advancement, I think a lot of those issues stem from not being open to receiving. Now, let me get into that, okay? You can be as healed and developed and you can have the ideal archetype of you know a person, but you will never fall into connection and get what you want out of life if you're not open to it. And that's what makes life so tough. Is I don't think, like, people approach it the wrong way. They think they have to do it through brute force, and I think with some things you certainly do. And, with some phases in life, you have to. Like, if you're broke, you kind of have no choice if you want to change your circumstances. However, once you reach a certain point, you realize that, you may ask yourself, or you may ask, or, the universe, or whatever you want to call it, God, okay? You might be like, what's going on here? Why am I not getting what I want? Even though that I've done the work, I've done this, I have this body, I have this money, I've done a lot of internal changes. Why is it still not coming? And I think for the most part, the issue is that you may just not be open. Like, energetically, you might still be closed off. You might still have some lingering trauma. You might still have a lot of self limiting beliefs and hang ups. And I think this is very common on the relationship side of things, but again, I'm not here to belittle or demonize. I'm actually here just sharing my own experience as well because I'm working on that too. Like, everything I talk about in my videos, guys, like, it's not from me judging people. It's from me explaining my own shortcomings and my experiences and whether I've overcame them or not. Sometimes that might be a bit harsh, but for something like this, I'm not going to. But anyways, it's not being open. That's what it is. And it can actually go deep. It can reflect in your body language. It can reflect in your mannerisms. Oftentimes people who, say they're the best talkers on earth, they're very charismatic. Now, say they get into a conversation with a woman, a man and a woman. If your body language is shifted, that even if you're having a great conversation and you feel some chemistry, but if your body is subconsciously positioned away, and just the way you talk might be like a little bit, avoidant, that just reflects. It reflects in your body language, in your posture, in your communication timing. Like, it's very, very, very subtle. But even if the other person doesn't notice, energetically that will hinder your chances of ever connecting with them, because it's almost like you're rejecting it. It's not that they're rejecting you, it's that you are rejecting it. And again, this is also the same thing with jobs, business opportunities. I've known a lady in Australia who I've met, and I think this is common for a lot of entrepreneurs. I'll probably reach this point eventually too. I mean, hopefully not, but we'll see. Where she mentioned that the first time her business popped off, it was like a ticket sales type of business, coaching, things like that. So she hosted an event and she made so much money that she self sabotaged for months, months. And I don't know if it was like a reckless spending type of issue. I think it was more so just a very unfamiliar emotional burden that she had to cope with and that she was not prepared to do. And it challenged her beliefs, like when you're raised, I don't know if she was raised in poverty, But when you're raised in poverty or something, you might get a bunch of money and believe that you're not worthy of it just because of the way that your brain has been programmed and conditioned since you were a kid when you were living in impoverished conditions. That can tremendously impact your self esteem, and it could also impact your thought process, and it could actually prevent you from changing your circumstances because you believe it is not possible. Again, that's another example. Self limiting beliefs. You feel like you don't deserve it. You feel like you can't handle it. And oftentimes, if you feel that way, even if it's very subtle, like sometimes you don't even catch those thoughts, you might still receive that money and then it just disappears. Through whichever avenue possible, it just disappears. Or it just never comes to you because you never put yourself in a position where you can potentially obtain it in the first place. I think a good example is Mike Tyson. Obviously, he grew up in horrid circumstances, extreme poverty. It was just basically nothing. And then all of a sudden, when he became heavyweight champion instantly, his net worth is like what, 200 million. And then a few years later, from a bunch of things that happened, he lost all his wealth and was like what, $50 million in debt. That's just one. That's another example, and it's like, guys, sometimes you have to be. It's just a matter of being open, and it's so hard because it's like, what does that mean to be open? But I don't think it's some sort of switch that you flip, and it's like, oh, I'm now open. It doesn't work like that. I think it's like, I think that's what requires the most internal shifting, because it's like I said, being open is not a conscious choice. It's a sign that your energy is flowing and it's fluid and it's open to receiving whatever it is out there. And it's like you can't really reach that point if you're stuck in your ways. And many people are. And this is the really confusing thing too. You can energetically be open when it comes to money. Okay? You could have done a lot of work and now you have an abundance mindset when it comes to money. So now money's flowing through you, it's an energy, and you're accumulating it, you're generating it. Because I don't think money is something that you grab. I don't think there's a limited amount of it. I think it's just something that you generate. But then you could have also had a very terrible upbringing and your mother and father were on bad terms, or maybe you just had bad experiences with people early in your life. And say you make a lot of money, that's cool. But when it comes to people and relationships, it ain't working out. You aren't open because you still have that trauma and, a lot of work on to do when it comes to that realm. So it's like not like all or nothing. Each category has its place. But my point is that I think in order to be open, you have to really, I think it's just a matter of transparency with yourself. It's being as honest as you can, no matter how much yucky stuff is inside. And it's just about like going through the dirt and going through the terrible things in order to reach the answer, which is the hardest part because now your identity has to change. You have to challenge your way of being, and it's very uncomfortable. But I think that's the only way to become open, guys. Like, and a lot of times I think actually what restricts you from being open is the voice of the ego and the voice of trauma. I've talked about this in previous videos, but I think human beings, we have different voices in our heads. And like I said, not in a schizophrenic way, but rather we have different inner dialogues that take place constantly. And that's why in meditation, they say meditation is simply a matter of observing your thoughts, because many of your thoughts are not authentic, but they're thoughts, so we think they are. So, self limiting beliefs, you feel like they may be true because your brain, it's just the way that our brain works. It's a very complicated thing. However, sometimes you have to look back and observe those thoughts and be like, that's not really real. That's coming from a place of ego. It's coming from a place of me not wanting to change my beliefs. And sometimes it could be from trauma, where it's like, you know, I'm not lovable because I'm ugly, and you may not even be ugly, but when you were a kid, you were called that. So it's like an ongoing, repetitive loop, and it's like it's stuff like that, and it's just you have to get to the bottom of that in order to be open, and it's not something that you decide. It just happens. That I think that's why people are like, when you don't look for something, it comes for you. It's because it's like it's not that you're hiding in your room and actually doing nothing. It's like, no, you're just living your daily life, and you're not putting too much emphasis or pressure on it. If it appears, it appears. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Or maybe later on. But point being, man, it's like being open. That's what it means. That's what it is. But anyways, I think that's the answer to all.